This one's heavy.
They weren't just bidders chasing dusty lockers, they were the heart and soul of storage wars. Every laugh, every heated argument, every risky bet made them unforgettable. But behind the excitement, time was quietly stealing them away. One by one, some of our favorite faces disappeared, not because they quit the game, but because life had a different plan. Today, we honor 10 beloved Storage Wars stars whose journeys ended far too soon, and why their loss still leaves an empty space on the auction floor. Number 10. Gunter Nezhoda. The Storage Wars family lost someone who not only brought warmth, but humor and genuine kindness to the screen. Gunter Nezhoda, who had been part of the show since its 4th season, passed away at the age of 67 after battling serious health problems caused by lung cancer. His son, Rene, who many fans also know from the show, shared the heartbreaking news through an emotional video he posted on social media. He explained that his father's condition had worsened to the point where there was nothing doctors could do. Rene spoke openly about everything, saying that about 6 months earlier, Gunter had been told he had lung cancer. He said his father had been smoking for around 30 years, and even though he had stopped for a while, the damage had already been done. In the video, Rene explained that his father had holes in his lungs and his body just couldn't handle it anymore. Gunter passed away in his sleep while in the hospital, and his youngest son, Ricky, was there with him during those final hours in Salt Lake City, Utah.
My dad 6 months ago was diagnosed with lung cancer. He's been smoking for 30 years.
Rene said the reason he chose to share this news publicly was that so many people had grown to love his father over the years. Gunter was one of those rare people on television who didn't get hate or negativity from viewers. Everyone on set liked working with him, and fans always looked forward to seeing him on screen. Rene went on to thank everyone for the kind messages and said they had kept his father's condition private because they truly believed he would get better. They didn't expect things to end like this. Gunter had joined the show a few years after Rene and his wife Casey had already made a name for themselves as the Bargain Hunters, running their thrift store in Poway, California. Gunter had joined his son in Season 8, and soon enough, he became a fan favorite. Gunter called himself a passionate photographer and a bass player. Over the years, he played with Michael Schenker, Leslie West, and Pat Travers. Gunter also appeared in a few movies, including Do Not Disturb and The Haunting of Death Valley Junction. He was born in Austria and moved to Las Vegas in 1990, where he built a life for himself and his family. According to reports, Gunter had recently flown to Utah for emergency surgery, and even though his family hoped things would turn around, the illness had already gone too far. What makes this even harder for fans is that Gunter had just started to become a bigger part of the show. People were getting to know him better, and while his time on Storage Wars may have been brief compared to others, the way he touched people's hearts left a lasting memory. Number 9. Brandi Sheets. Brandi Sheets was known for being right beside his dad Daryl on Storage Wars, and the two made a strong team. In 2017, however, things changed suddenly when Brandi was let go from the show. The reason for this, as claimed by the producers, was as a result of budget cuts, yet his dad stayed on, which left Brandi needing to figure out what to do next. As a result, he tried different jobs, including selling real estate. He ended up working as a truck driver for UPS, which seemed like just another job, until one day something terrifying happened that almost cost him his life. Brandi shared what happened in a post on Instagram in early 2022, where he posted a picture of the crashed truck and explained what happened that night. He explained that he had been asleep in the back of the UPS semi-truck and his partner was off that day, so someone else was filling in. While Brandi was asleep, this co-driver crashed into another truck while going 70 miles per hour. Brandi explained that waking up felt like a bomb had exploded, and everything around him was chaos. He was rushed to a hospital in Texas before being sent back home to Arizona to start healing. Although he only had minor physical injuries, he made it clear that the experience was deeply upsetting and that UPS didn't support him the way they should have. According to him, the company didn't give him any workers' compensation and didn't even pay for the things he lost in the crash. What made this worse was knowing it all could have been avoided if better safety training had been given, especially for drivers working in teams on long road trips. He ended his message by saying everyone needed to work together to raise safety awareness and that big companies like UPS should take more care of their people. What makes Brandon's story even more strange is that he's not the only one from Storage Wars to go through something like this. Not too long before that, his father, Daryl Sheets, faced a serious health scare. And this wasn't just a small issue. Daryl, who many fans remember as the gambler on the show, had been part of Storage Wars since the beginning. After taking a short break when the show paused for a while, he came back in Season 13 and kept going through Seasons 14 and 15. However, when Season 16 was announced for June 7, 2025, fans noticed that Daryl wasn't listed as part of the new cast. Now, as this was happening, some people online started spreading false rumors that he had passed away, but his social media showed that he was still alive. And not only that, but in 2023, he even started a business called Show Me Your Junk in Havasu, Arizona. However, back in 2019, Daryl had a very severe health emergency that put him in the hospital. At the time, he said he had been sick for 3 months. Not only that, he had a mild heart attack later on. In a post which he later deleted, he explained that doctors told him he had congestive heart failure, along with something very serious going on in one of his lungs. It was a lot to deal with all at once, and the fact that it had built up over months made it even scarier because he hadn't seen it coming. He ended up needing surgery, and 1 month later he gave an update saying his heart function was back to 40%, which meant it was getting stronger. It also meant he could take off the defibrillator vest he had to wear after the heart scare. But not everything was all right at the time. Daryl mentioned that he wasn't completely safe yet, since his heart was still not at full strength, yet he felt hopeful that things would be better with time. Number 8. Dave Hester.
$185 going once, $185 going twice. I'll let you wait for $175 for an 80.
What if a TV show is not just about fun and drama? What if something darker is hiding behind all the shouting, the auctions, and the laughter? That's the kind of talk going around about Storage Wars. People who have watched the show for years have started noticing something strange. It's not just about who finds the best stuff in the lockers or who makes the most money anymore. It's about how some of the cast members ended up sick, in pain, or even on the verge of losing their lives. One by one, people from the show started having serious problems. Some had accidents, others got very sick, and a few even came close to not making it out alive. That's when fans started speculating that a curse had been placed on the show. Dave Hester wasn't just another person on Storage Wars. He was one of the main stars, and probably the loudest voice on the show with his famous "Yup!" He always knew how to win, how to play tough, and how to keep all eyes on him. Dave brought drama to the show, and that's what most fans who watch reality shows look forward to. In 2012, however, he claimed that the show was fake. He said that the lockers were filled with items on purpose to make the show more exciting. And he did not stop there. He went to court and filed a legal complaint. The network, A&E, didn't like that at all, and as a result, they took him off the show. Most people would have decided to remain quiet after the whole saga. But Dave did not back down on his claims. A&E brought him back. Maybe they realized he was important to the show, or maybe they thought people would forget what he said. Either way, Dave returned, but his life would never be the same again. Soon after he came back, Dave faced something much worse than legal trouble. He had a hemorrhagic stroke, which means there was bleeding in his brain. This happened because of high blood pressure and sleep apnea. Two things many people have but don't always treat seriously. The stroke nearly took his life. 1 minute he was on TV, and the next he was lying in a hospital bed, unable to move or talk. At that point, the doctors weren't sure he would make it. But somehow, Dave survived. While fans were genuinely happy to see him alive and trying to move forward, many people started asking why incidents like this keep happening to people from the show. Dave's story wasn't the only one. Other cast members also began dealing with strange problems. Some had health scares. Others were involved in weird accidents. This was supposed to be a show about people finding forgotten treasures. But instead, the cast seemed to be walking into misfortune again and again. And now it makes you wonder, if something strange really is going on behind the scenes of Storage Wars, then who might be the next one to suffer? Number 7. Mark Balelo. Mark Balelo, who became widely known through the show Storage Wars, was found inside his car one early Monday morning. And sadly, he was no longer alive. His car was parked inside the garage of his business, Balelo Inc., which was located in Simi Valley, California. When the officials arrived, they confirmed he had passed away after breathing in carbon monoxide and exhaust fumes. He was just 40 years old. And even though the details were difficult to accept, everything pointed to the fact that he had ended his own life. Mark had always stood out on television, not just because of the work he did, but also because of how he carried himself. People who watched Storage Wars will remember him as Rico Suave, a nickname that matched the way he dressed and acted during the auctions. He often wore flashy clothes and showed up with stacks of cash, ready to outbid anyone if he thought something valuable was hidden inside a storage locker. Behind the scenes, however, things may have been different. Just 2 days before he was found, Mark had been arrested at his auction business for having methamphetamines and for being under the influence. He had a court date already set for February 19th, which means he was already dealing with serious legal trouble. And this likely made everything feel heavier than he could handle. Although he got out of the situation without facing serious time, it had a seemingly negative impact on Balelo's mental well-being. This was so heavy that he asked his fiancée, Elizabeth Mercedes, to keep him company at his office during that time, since he felt mentally unstable. Elizabeth left after the visit, thinking he was better. Unfortunately, they found his body the next day. Mark wasn't just a TV personality. He was born in Portugal and spent his early years in Brazil until he was about 14. After moving to the United States, he began building a life for himself from the ground up. Before he ever stepped into the spotlight, he owned a video game store called Game Exchange. Later in 2011, he opened his auction house, which allowed him to step into the world of buying and selling forgotten or abandoned items. Back in 2011, Mark made headlines for helping return a very rare comic book to actor Nicolas Cage. The comic was Action Comics 1, the very first issue that introduced Superman back in 1938. That comic had been missing for more than 10 years after it was stolen from Cage's home. Mark found it while going through the contents of a storage locker he had purchased. And when the truth came out about what he had discovered, the comic's value, which was close to $1 million, wasn't the only thing people talked about. Many were impressed that he made sure the comic got back to its original owner. And that story stayed tied to his name ever since. But now, all those stories are being remembered with sadness. Because the truth is, no one genuinely knows what someone is going through on the inside, no matter how confident or cheerful they may seem in public. When officers arrived at the scene, they found Mark inside his car, and even though help was called, he was not breathing anymore. The official cause of his demise was listed as asphyxia from breathing in the fumes. Number 6. Moe Prigoff. For years, people watched Moe Prigoff on Storage Wars, Texas bidding on forgotten lockers, wearing clothes no one else would dare to wear, cracking jokes as if nothing could ever shake him. But behind all of that, there was so much more to this man. He was a doctor, he was a collector, he ran a business, and he had a family. Now, Morris Moe Prigoff didn't just love beautiful things, he understood them.
I brought you a couple pieces of art.
All right. Oh, you got a nice Alexander Calder here.
For over 30 years, he searched for rare furniture, unique art, and anything that told a story. Then, after a decade of selling pieces around Dallas, he opened his store and called it River Regency Modern. Moe had an eye for details that most people would usually miss, and with help from his young store manager Robert, he managed to keep the store running even while juggling his work as a podiatrist. But how did someone like Moe, who was always full of energy and style, manage to do all this while also becoming one of the most memorable faces on television auctions? He often partnered with Mary Padian, and together they made a great team. While Mary later moved on to the main show in California, Moe stayed in Texas, where his medical work was still his main focus. The others called him the Doc, and he stayed on the show for all 3 seasons. However, when the cameras stopped rolling, who was he then? Moe didn't just run his store or his medical practice. He also loved music, art, gardening, teaching, swimming, and basketball. He loved to travel, and he found joy in things that had meaning. And no matter where he went, he made sure to leave a mark. His love for his wife Michaele, whom he called "my wife for life," showed in at everything he said about her. They were married for 19 years, and during his final years, she was the one who stayed by his side and helped him through his health struggles. Unfortunately, this pattern came to an abrupt stop after he got sick. He had been dealing with the illness for 6 years, and even though he kept going for as long as he could, he passed away on March 4th, 2021. Moe was more than just a cast member on a TV show, because he brought life into a business where most people only saw dust and broken things. Number 5. Dan Dodson. Dan Dodson had already built a strong name for himself in the auction world long before Storage Wars ever came along. He learned how auctions worked and went on to start his own company called American Auctioneers. Not long after, his wife Laura joined him in business, and they worked side by side, becoming one of the most recognizable couples on the show. Just like Jarrod and Brandi, Dan and Laura were often seen together running auctions and getting the crowd going. Everything seemed to be just fine until something terrible happened in 2014 that could have changed everything forever. It started as just a normal day, but Dan started feeling unwell. He complained of a strong headache and started mixing up his words in a way that didn't make sense, which made Laura immediately realize something was very wrong. She looked at him and noticed his eyes had rolled back, his legs were giving out under him, and his skin color shifted from red and purple to a scary shade of bluish green. As soon as she noticed this, she called for help and stayed by his side as things got worse very quickly. What Dan was going through was not just a headache or some random fainting spell. It was 2 brain aneurysms happening at once. Most people don't make it out of something like that, and for a moment it looked like Dan might not pull through, but somehow he did. Doctors later said one reason he made it was because there wasn't too much bleeding inside his head when it all happened, which gave them a better chance of treating him. His neurologist, Dr. M. Asif Taki, explained that Dan surviving something so serious was rare but possible. Once he was stable, Dan stayed in the hospital for a while, and Laura was there with him every step of the way. While lying in that hospital bed, something changed in him. He turned to Laura and said, "Guess what? I'm a non-smoker now." That moment showed how close he came to losing everything, and how he didn't want to waste another second doing things that could hurt his health. Number 4. Dan and Laura Dodson. After everything Dan Dodson had already been through, including the time he nearly lost his life from a brain aneurysm, you would think the worst was behind him. Unfortunately, more pain was still waiting just around the corner. This life-threatening incident shook both him and his wife Laura in a way that no parent ever wants to imagine, because they almost lost their son, Garrett Dodson. Before that, Dan had already suffered another strange and painful moment when one of their French bulldogs suddenly attacked him and almost bit off one of his fingers. However, what happened in 2020 was far more terrifying and far more heartbreaking. Their son Garrett, who was just 22 years old, had traveled to Arizona to visit his girlfriend, and during that trip, something horrible happened that changed everything in a matter of seconds. While Garrett was in Arizona, he was shot, and the damage was so terrible. His ability to call for help himself was a miracle. Laura later told the reporters that Garrett dialed 911 even while he was badly hurt and barely hanging on. Yet when he was rushed to a nearby hospital, things were getting worse fast, and the doctors soon realized they couldn't treat him there. They had to move quickly and fly him out to Las Vegas because of how serious his condition had become. Laura explained that the bullet had torn into one of the largest veins in Garrett's body. the vena cava. This caused him to bleed on the inside. As a result of how dire things were, a doctor had to jump onto the operating table and use his hands to hold everything together while trying to stop the bleeding. As he was doing this, he kept massaging Garrett's heart to keep him alive during the flight to Las Vegas. And all this happened while Garrett was still in a very fragile state. Once they got to Las Vegas, the medical team took him straight into surgery. And somehow, against all odds, the doctors were able to fix the damage and save his life. Dan later said how thankful they were, because many people came together that day to keep their son alive. They knew it could have ended in a much different way if even one thing had gone wrong. As for the person who hurt Garrett, the police later arrested a man named Garrett Wilder. He was charged with multiple crimes, including 2 counts of aggravated assault and disorderly conduct with a weapon, along with other serious charges. Number 3. Jarrod Schultz and Brandi Passante. Now, storage wars had kicked off, and Jarrod Schultz and Brandi Passante were the couple everyone followed. People liked how they worked together, laughed together, and seemed like they had it all figured out. What you might not know is that even though they had a spin-off called Brandi and Jarrod, Married to the Job, the two of them never got married. Still, they stayed together for years and raised their kids while building a life around auctions and second-hand treasures. Over time, however, things started to change. By 2021, their relationship was over. They said it openly on the first episode of season 13, and although they weren't a couple anymore, they still filmed the show together and were just trying to keep things professional for the cameras. But then, in May 2021, something happened, and it changed everyone's perspective on how things were. TMZ had reported that Jarrod was facing charges for domestic violence against Brandi. The story said they ran into each other at a bar in Orange County. Brandi was out with some friends, and when Jarrod showed up, things got tense. She reportedly asked him to leave more than once, but he didn't. Then it escalated and, according to the reports, turned physical. While this news was going around, Jarrod stayed quiet and didn't respond to the news, which only made fans more confused. They didn't know what to believe. All they had were headlines and guesses, until Brandi posted something on Instagram. She showed a tattoo that said "free," and the message she wrote under it said so much without naming anyone directly. She explained that the tattoo meant she had survived something that could have broken her. She talked about how lucky she felt to have made it out of a bad situation that many people never escape from. She also said she was thankful for the peace and safety she felt. Number 2. Brandi Passante. When Brandi Passante first appeared in the very first season of Storage Wars, nobody expected how fast her name would grow. She became one of the most recognized faces on the show because of the bond she shared with her partner, Jarrod Schultz. Their chemistry was so natural that A&E decided to give them their own spin-off in 2014, which they called Brandi and Jarrod, Married to the Job. This move pushed her even further into the spotlight. But this dose of fame came with its downsides. In 2020, Brandi talked about something she had kept for a long time. When she sat down for an interview on The Dad Diary with Danny Jordan, she shared how fame had affected her. She mentioned that as people started to recognize her more in public, things started getting strange. She started getting letters that didn't feel like fan mail. Some of them were so disturbing that they made her worry about her safety and her children's. She also mentioned that it got so bad at one point that she had to move into a gated community with full-time security just to feel safe. As a result, she had to talk to a therapist because everything happening around her started to take a toll. It made her scared to go outside, scared to be seen, and she stopped living normally for a while. But with time and with help, she said things started getting better, and she began to feel more like herself again. But this was just the tip of the iceberg on the list of terrible things that happened to her. Who else on the Storage Wars crew suffered a terrible near-death experience? Let's find out. Number 1. Barry Weiss. Barry Weiss became popular because of the show Storage Wars, even though he had never bought a single storage unit before that. He joined the show thanks to Tom Beers, who who had known him for years and was also one of the producers. But unlike most people on the show who wanted to make money from the things they found, Barry was different. He just loved looking for strange and interesting things that caught his eye. Sometimes he even brought psychics to the auctions just to guess what might be hidden inside the units. And he didn't mind spending money on unusual items even if they weren't valuable. He stood out with his West Coast chopper glasses, skeleton gloves, and those wild cars like the chicken-themed one he drove to auctions. People liked him because he didn't act like the others. So when he stopped appearing on the show, a lot of fans were left disappointed and wondering why he left so suddenly. Around April 2019, however, Barry got into a terrible motorcycle crash with his friend in Los Feliz, Los Angeles. They ran straight into a car, and the crash was so bad that they were both rushed to the hospital. Barry's injuries were much worse, and they left people genuinely worried. After the accident, rumors started going around that he was no longer around, but that's about it. Now that you've heard these stories, whose loss hit you the hardest? And do you believe those who think there's a ploy going on behind the scenes of this show? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, explore the other videos on your screen.